Speaking of this particular point, it reminded me of an article I read earlier today. Kate Clark, who is an analyst with Afghan Analyst Network, she wrote an article, an op-ed for Tolo News, and basically she was describing how actually she wrote a report for Afghan Analyst Network earlier. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and subsequently she wrote an opinion piece. It's on Tolo News's website. I encourage everyone to read her op-ed, and also the longer report, which is also published on Afghan Analyst Network's website. What's important is that we have now 19 years of this experiment in Afghanistan with this current government. And after 19 years, there is still a lot that is actually, like, it's fundamentally wrong about this whole system. So it's dysfunctional. And people need to ask why. So Kate Clark tried to address this point, and she tried to answer it. And she has a very interesting and elaborate answer. For most people, I think her article may be too complicated, because you need to be brought up to speed to certain things that she is discussing. I won't try to summarize her whole research, but I want to point out to something very specific. See, when the current government was established in 2002 after the Bonn agreements and everything, what they did is that they created an economy where the government and the entire apparatus was dependent on aid. Okay, there was no serious effort made to create a self-reliant government where the administrators have to work hard and serve the people. They were more focused on how to please their donors. So the administrators in our public service in Afghanistan, they know that their entire budget depends on donations, so they don't feel any obligation in pleasing the people, the majority.
There's no incentive to actually govern.
Yes, so their incentive is, how do I please the donors, because that's where the money is coming from. But in a normal functioning state, and a normal functioning country, the main source of money that a government gets is from taxation. So you tax the people, and in exchange for tax, you provide services. So as a public servant, you're basically providing a service in exchange for the money that the people give you as a taxpayer.
I guess it comes in the term public servant. I think that's missed on a lot of people, but that is what it is. The idea is that you serve the public.
Yeah. So the army, the police, the bureaucracy of the government, health services, all these things that fall under the responsibility of the state in a normal functioning government, in a normal functioning state, all of it is financed with tax money coming from the people. So that's why you have the system of checks and balances. You have a responsibility. You have politicians who get elected, and once they're elected, they will ensure that the bureaucracy and the public service is working efficiently to serve the people. But this is not something that was really attempted at in 2002. When they created this government, they didn't really try to create a functioning state. They said, you know what? Okay, so you have Fulani Khan, you have this warlord, you have this Bachabaz, you have this drug dealer. Get them all together. I will give you $10 million. I will give you $5 million. You just go sit together. And then they try to create a state based on pleasing these thugs, these warlords and criminals. And now that everything is falling apart, now that after 19 years of wasting money, everything is falling apart. The Western donors, they are now tired, and they say, you know what, I don't feel like financing your lavish lifestyle anymore, Mr. Afghan politician or Mr. Warlord. So we're going to pull back. And while this is happening, people are saying, we still need foreign aid and foreign money. Yes, you still need it, but it's not the solution. It's not the solution. The solution is to actually create a new system where the state is responsible and the state is accountable, and where the people have a vested interest in demanding a functioning state. Because even in Afghanistan, in all sorts of areas, there are people who might be illiterate, they might not know different languages, but they know one thing: the money is coming from outside.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like you mentioned, the point of tax. Okay, now all of these hundreds of billions of dollars that have poured into Afghanistan and just been sucked up in Kabul, we have to ask, where did this money come from? Right, Western taxpayers. That's where it came from. So the Western taxpayer is not just paying for the services that his or her government provides them with. He is also paying for what is apparently a state-building project, a state-building, nation-building project in Afghanistan. Now, I'm British. I'm going to mention another example. In the run-up to the referendum about Brexit, one of the points, a slogan that was chanted was, "Aid is money going from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries." And there's a lot of literature regarding aid, whether or not it works, whether or not it's something that it's a mechanism by which less developed countries should be helped. But what we see is that these hundreds of billions of dollars came from Western taxpayers. Okay, and where did they end up? They didn't end. They rarely, if ever, ended up going to their intended defined purpose. They actually ended up in the pockets of XYZ, who bought really nice apartments in Dubai's Palm Island or Marina or wherever else. And we actually discussed this. I'm not sure if you remember, Sangar, in the podcast with Patricia Ghostman, where she pointed out, and it's a controversial point to point out because a lot of people don't like acknowledging this because it imparts a lot of blame, but blame should be allocated. We shouldn't be shy to say whoever's responsible for this current situation. The US and the international mission in Afghanistan started off as a counterterrorism mission, and this counterterrorism mission in Afghanistan was framed and informed by propaganda, which we discussed with Sayyid Ibrahim, about who the Taliban were, what they were, and what they stood for. So on the basis of a flawed perception of the Taliban, this project was started, and the actual fundamentals of governance, of good governance, were relegated to the need to co-opt and bring on side very unsavory characters, warlords, drug lords, criminals with very questionable human rights records. These people were brought on side to defeat an image of the Taliban that didn't actually exist, right? And now we're here 19 years later, right? And now we've thrown our hands up in the air, whereas we should have actually known 19 years ago, these people didn't grow out of the sand or the mountains or whichever landscape in Afghanistan. They were there, they were known, many of them actually had international links, and the international community alongside the current government in Kabul need to take full accountability for this.
True, because we have a problem where in the West they say, well, the project in Kabul in Afghanistan failed because these savage people, they are so corrupt and evil.
Fantastically corrupt, as the British Prime Minister said about them, yeah.
Yeah, and then in Afghanistan you have these Kabul elitist people inside Kabul bubble who are now suddenly anti-American. You know, they're
that's a pattern. That's a pattern that always, as long as there has been foreign intervention in Afghanistan. Okay, now one of the characters that is the most reviled in the Afghan popular imagination is Shuja Shah Durrani, who was the grandson of Ahmad Shah Durrani, who was the founder of Afghanistan. Shuja came to power at the head of a British army. Amir Dost Muhammad Khan fled, and when the British left Afghanistan after being killed in the mountains east of Kabul by Ghilzai tribesmen amongst other tribesmen, it was at that point where Shah Shuja realized that, oh no, I am very deeply unpopular, and he started to consider, and I think he actually announced a jihad against the British. He ended up getting stabbed by one of his supporters. That's Shah Shuja. Okay? You had Amir Abdurrahman Khan, who we discussed with Dr. Saib Nafis in the podcast, right? Brought to power by the British. And the only way in which one of his main propaganda in which he justified his rule to the Afghans at the time, who he was massacring, was, I'm the only one that can protect you from the infidel British.
Yeah.
We had, not so long ago, we had Dr. Saib Najib, who was a Marxist, who was the head of the secret police under the Soviet occupation, becomes president, seems to realize that the Soviet occupation isn't working, gets the Russians to withdraw, becomes Dr. Najibullah, becomes an Islamist, and is now in many circles known as a nationalist hero. And now we're seeing the same pattern again. With we've got these Kabul very posh, very highly educated technocrats, government officials. Now, after 19 years of foreign occupation and war, now they are opposed to foreign interference in domestic Afghan affairs. Why? Because the Americans decided to withdraw. So what they're saying is, actually, you need our permission to withdraw. You don't really need our permission to wage war for 19 years, though.
Yeah. And this particular group of people, I think, out of all people, they're probably the most delusional group in Afghanistan. Because I was listening to Khalid Pashtun, who is a people's
He's from Kandahar.
Yeah. And he was speaking at these, Afghan talk shows, political talk shows, and he was talking, and he said, America is never going to leave Afghanistan. They will stay here. Don't pay attention to Trump. He's just a fool. In America, they're very smart. These bright minds in America, they know that their interests are in Afghanistan, and they will stay here forever. See, these people are so delusional. They think that the people in America are stupid and that they are going to finance this corrupt scheme forever. They're so detached from reality, and that's the worst thing. The worst thing is not just someone who is trying to deceive you, someone who is lying, someone who is trying to fool you. Worst thing is someone who actually believes his own lies, somebody who actually believes in his own delusions of whatever. That's the biggest problem about these people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could say that Khalid Pashtun comes from like the different demographic than some of the guys in Kabul. He's not Western educated. He seems to be quite a senior in age, but a lot of these people are. A lot of what I've noticed is that they're dressing up their opposition to American withdrawal in sort of mid-20th century literature of anti-colonialism, sometimes even anti-capitalism. So yeah. It's you notice these things. So like the mid-20th century opposition to imperialism and all of that kind of stuff. So it almost echoes a communist, a socialist mantra, or they're trying to, it's the subliminal sort of, it's the white man and trying to draw common cause with other movements in the world. It's the chameleons amongst these ideologies or these political mantras are actually pretty astonishing.
I think we need an entire show where we dismantle these people's ideas about colonialism and capitalism and oppression, because it needs to be addressed. This kind of delusional way of thinking needs to be addressed. So I suggest we dedicate an entire show for this.
You know what? I'm entirely in agreement with you, and I think with that note, I should also mention as a host of this podcast that with the improved equipment and all of the support that we've gotten so far, we're not going to stop. There will be more podcasts. We will have more very high profile guests with the different refreshing insights in our coming episodes. So one of the suggestion that Sangar just came up with on our podcast to talk about the literature and the discourse surrounding colonialism and capitalism and imperialism, we will find someone suitable to discuss these things with, as we have other people in mind. I think I actually have someone else in mind, Sangar, for whom I would like to discuss these things.
I know.
But I think we'll leave that to another time. Inshallah. But you wanted to move on, but I just wanted to put that in there as well.